And we are live. Aya, and welcome. So far in the room, we have Vera Tariel King Gibson. Aya. We have Draco Lomelindo, and we also have Nimue Avalon. Nice to see you guys.
Hi, everybody.
And Aya, welcome.
Hello.
And actually, in the room, we have we have Dave and we have Dakyndre. So we are going to get loaded up here with the document to share, which is Dave's, but later we may also have some fairy lore material to refer to that Dakyndre has, depending on some questions that may come in from the audience today, and we're going to see like how this all works out. So without much further ado, maybe we can talk about the background of why this video is necessary.
Yeah, because
So,
some people
Dave,
may
do
not know.
you want to start with that discussion of why we had to make this video? Because we made a private one for our patrons, but this is the first time that
we get a lot of people who join the Facebook group and just general inquiries from the public who seem to think that the word elves and the word fairies mean the same thing, and in the Legendarium context, that's definitely not true. I can't speak for wider folklore because it isn't my interest, but that's why Dakyndre's here. But that's the basis that is kicking this off, because people confuse the two in modern culture. So, and then Lisa, you can add if you want.
I would definitely agree with that, and and by the Legendarium, it's definitely different. But Dakyndre, do you want to address the side where actually there's a lot of different folklore and how they got confused, and some of the other things, like some of the things that you've learned on your own readings, some that you've learned from Morgan's class? And Morgan, if you guys don't know, is probably of our time the best fairy folklorist that I'm aware of.
I would agree with that. I reference her material often.
Yeah.
It goes back partly to, they are different. Originally in like the medieval folklore, it was used where elves, trolls, fairies, demons, nymphs, a few different things were all used very oftentimes interchangeably due to, in a sense, ignorance at the time. Like the early human societies did not know that they were different beings, so they just used it interchangeably.
Right. They may not, in other words, like because of education levels and other things, like they may have encountered beings that, and they just named them what they knew, or that they didn't have the vocabulary for necessarily what they were seeing.
Right. And like elves, interestingly enough, were originally in most of the old folklore thought to be only males. They didn't think that there were female elves or fairies or anything, because they had only encountered at that time the males. And so like when you look at like probably 13th or 14th century material, it described males or as elves and fairies as males only. Like there was no distinction.
Now, I do wonder if that was mostly reported by female humans.
That would be my assumption as well. And they just didn't
about that.
Females, so they were just like, oh, we've only heard stories of males, therefore they're all males.
They're all male. Yeah, something. I mean, wow, very interesting. Okay, well, I guess we're going to hop right in here with the Legendarium piece that Dave has some really well-prepared notes. And if you guys need these notes, they're down in the description, and you can get them like after the video's done if you can't access your description of the video, but it's already there for you to link and download. Later, we are going to have some fairy lore material for you guys to reference. But for right now, much of what is available online, you could probably find on sacred texts sacred-texts.com, and that's sacred-texts, texts.com. There is a fairy section. Like when you are looking into the documents, there's quite a few things there. There's also a Tolkien area believed to be documents that Tolkien himself like referred to when he was writing the Middle Earth stories, which are known as the Legendarium. But on the note of the Legendarium, Dave, go ahead and take it away. We've got the document already loaded, so you can go ahead and read the copy, and I'll scroll down with it.
I'll do a little short explanation first.
Okay.
The word legendarium is a Latin word that literally means compendium of legends, and Tolkien used it and probably brought it into more into more modern use, but it actually goes back, I believe, to the late Middle Ages. So that's where the word actually comes from.
Okay.
It was a word in common use in those days, but no longer is, unless you're talking about Tolkien, in which case it is common. But anyway, I will start reading the document here.
Okay.
Differences between elves and fairies according to Tolkien's Legendarium. Within the Legendarium, differences between what modern people term elves and fairies are clear, and are most distinctly exemplified by two textual sources. The first is from an early writing called the Book of Lost Tales, in which the first versions of the great tales which later emerged in the Quenta Silmarillion, which was later published as a Silmarillion along with other shorter works. In this excerpt, the arrival of the Valar, who can be thought of as the Elven pantheon within the context of the Legendarium, is described, along with other beings clearly described as various types of fairies. And I'll go with the excerpt. Thereafter came Ulmo and Aule, and with Ulmo were none, save Salmar only, who was after known as Noldorin. For though good though was the heart of that mighty one, he thought ever deep thoughts alone, and was silent and aloof and haughty even to the Einar. But with Aule was a great lady Pelurian, whose delights were riches and fruits of the earth, for which reason she has long been called Yavanna among the Eldar. About them fared a great host who are the sprites of trees and woods, of dale and forest and mountainside, or those that sing amid the grass at morning and chant amid the standing corn at eve. These are the Nirmir and the Tavari, the Nandini and the Orosi, brownies, fays, pixies, and leprons, and what else are they not called, for the number is very great. Yet must they not be confused with the Eldar, for they were born before the world and are older than its oldest, and are not of it, but laugh at it much, for they had not somewhat to do with its making, so that it is for the most part a play for them. But the Eldar are of the world, and love it with a great and burning love, and are wistful in all their happiness for that reason. And that's from the Book of Lost Tales 1, The Coming of the Valar and the Building of Valinor.
Yeah, this is a loaded passage.
It really is. That's why I italicize part of it. I do a little brief explanation below. This passage contains a primary definition of fairies, which I've italicized, a description of the various types, and a final statement of differentiation, stating in which ways the elves, technically the Quendai or Eldar, which are the eponyms for their species, are not like the fairies. The second source is in the form of a letter of explanation to one of Professor Tolkien's many fans, whose population rapidly increased shortly after the publication of The Lord of the Rings. It is interesting in that the Quendai, elves, and men, humans, are clearly stated to be different hominin variants, to use a scientific classification, rather than a description of one lumpen physical species in juxtaposition to another mostly ethereal race, as often seems to be assumed online today. And I have a little footnote to use a scientific classification. This is from one of Tolkien's letters. Elves and men are evidently, in biological terms, one race, or they could not breed and produce fertile offspring, even as a rare event. And now I'll go back to the second. Okay. Now I'll go back to the second quote, where somebody asked him, "Well, how are elves and men different within the Lord of the Rings?" And he answers, "Of course, in fact, exterior to my story, elves and men are just different aspects of the humane, and represent the problem of death as seen by a finite but willing and self-conscious person. In this mythological world, the elves and men are in their incarnate forms kindred, but in the relation of their spirits to the world and time represent different experiments, each of which has its own natural trend and weakness. The elves represent, as it were, the artistic, aesthetic, and purely scientific aspects of the humane nature raised to a higher level than is actually seen in men. That is, they have a devoted love of the physical world, and a desire to observe and understand it for its own sake and as other, that is, as a reality derived from God in the same degree as themselves, not as a material for their use or as a power platform. They also possess a subcreational or artistic faculty of great excellence. They are therefore immortal, not eternally, but to endure with and within the created world while its story lasts. That means literally it lasts as long as the planet is going to last.
Yeah.
When killed by the injury or destruction of their incarnate form, they do not escape from time, but remain in the world, either disincarnate or being reborn. This becomes a great burden as the ages lengthen, especially in a world in which there is malice and destruction. I have left out the mythological form which malice or the fall of angels takes place in this fable. And that quote's from letter 181.
Okay.
As can be seen in this second reference, the elves of the Legendarium have very little to do with fairies in either modern or classic folkloric contexts, aside from their sometimes terrifying beauty. Tolkien himself later regretted using the word, and this is the last quote from letter 151. I now deeply regret having used elves, though this is a word in ancestry and original meaning suitable enough. But the disastrous debasement of this word, in which Shakespeare played an unforgivable part, has really overloaded it with regrettable tones, which are too much to overcome. I hope in the appendices to Volume 3 to be able to include a note on translation, in which the matter of equivalence and my uses may be made clearly. My difficulty has been that, since I have tried to present a kind of legendarium and history of a forgotten epoch, all the specific terms were in a foreign language, and no precise equivalents exist in English. And that's the end of the text. There's a footnote where it talks about terrifying beauty, but it may be better for the people to read that themselves because it references another story. But
okay. And I have it like in the frame right now, and people can certainly read that. And then as we go down, here are the works cited. So there's 3 different sources here. So it's all in the document that's downloadable. It's in the description. So I'll go ahead and pop out of this for now, and then we can have a discussion. So let me let you guys know that Christy, our newest patron, is in the room. She's been following us for like some 10 years and recently became a patron. Aya, welcome. Okay. And she is in YouTube. Her name is Dorian's Lover 119. So I just thought I would tell you if you guys are looking at the comments.
Okay.
So it looks like we are getting spammed by somebody. So let me knock this person out. Okay, block user. Okay, because we're having people like drop links in that like, and it has foreign names, and they're not. Yeah, it's like they're not participating in our conversation. Okay, and I have to block them again because it looks like. Okay, so I blocked them both. Oh, there's 2 people. Okay, they almost have the same account. So this happened the other day for me when I was on my timing magic account.
They have Cyrillic characters from my. At least that's what it shows up here.
What does it say?
Well, the character set is Cyrillic characters like they use in the Slavic languages, like in Russian and the other related languages. That's what it looks like here, unless my thing is translating it completely.
That might be the case, but they're not even participating. They're just dropping links. Like it's really. I mean, I'm gonna block you. Okay. I just don't have time. Like if you're gonna talk to us and add to the conversation, that's different. But I'm not gonna put up with bad behavior. They are
Oh,
Russian
okay.
names. Yes,
I thought so,
I
yeah.
understand that, but I'm just saying that they can talk to us and not be dropping links in the
Right.
thing, because that just tells me that they're spamming us and not participating.
They can even write in
So I
Russian
remove
because
them.
Lomilino can understand it. So, you know,
Oh,
they're
indeed. Oh, indeed. and we're very grateful for for that, right? So, okay. So we have 3 different quotes, and I may go back to the first one, because I think that that is the most important one, the one that was in the Lost Tales, because the ones in the letters, I mean, they do clarify more differences, like by virtue of like just discussing it, but it was more focused on elves and men and their differences. But the one in the Lost Tales is really explaining the difference between fairies and elves, and basically, like at the most basic level, the elves were created of the Ea, the earth. In other words, like when Ea was being sung into existence by the Ainur, the elves were created in that energy by Iluvatar. Okay, and so were men. Okay,
just the elves were fated to be arrive first.
and thereby tied to the world. Yeah, because even men don't share that fate. Like
Right.
there is if when men die, they go to Iluvatar directly. So you bypass the whole world. The elves are actually, committed to the world until the end of the world, like meaning end of Ardha.
That's what Tolkien meant by different experiments. Each race has
Exactly.
different, yeah.
Exactly. So the fairies, on the other hand, are older than the creation of Ea. They're older than that. So
It literally
they
says older
came
than the
in and
world.
visited, and they
Before the
think it's
world
like a
was oldest.
playground. They think it's to, oh, like, look at this creation. Oh, how fun. If you exist already and you find a new playground, I mean, it's kind of like that energy. Now, what I will also say is that in my, I guess, knowing, there are some similarities between the elves and fairies, and I think that the most similar thing is that they are both closer to nature, and where humans always try to overcome nature, or like try to work around nature, like they're trying to like always do something outside of nature and try to push the boundaries, right?
Yeah,
It
it's
seems
kind
to
of
me
a
that fairies and elves work in nature.
it's kind of a difference in worldview that isn't really programmed by the overculture. I mean, whatever culture they're
Yeah,
in, if you put them in different cultures, they would still have that natural tendency. Humans would have a natural tendency to dominate, and elves would have a natural tendency to preserve, basically.
exactly.
Right.
Yes, exactly. So that's what my observation is. And Dakyndre, did you want to hop in with fairy lore and elven lore, like that you have found that is outside of the Legendarium, and maybe how it ties in with Tolkien?
It ties in some of it quite a bit. In most of the fairy lore, the fairies, like I said earlier, fairy and elf was used interchangeably, but so was others. At one point, fairy was actually used in folklore as a term for the elves to avoid their detection. So if you said elf, elven, elves, you would draw attention to them. And later in lore, that was something you didn't want to have
It even
happen.
talks about it in the Lost Tales. It says, it doesn't say for whatever they are called. It says for whatever they are not called, meaning don't call them.
And so, but you used fairy, the way it kind of got hooked onto being the same thing was people would talk about the elves and call them fairy so that the elves wouldn't know they were being talked about.
I see.
Because one vast difference from Tolkien's writing, and I think it comes probably from his sort of Catholic background, or maybe his material is an older source. I'm not sure which, but in most of the more modern elven folklore and kind of fairy, elves were extremely sexual beings. So you didn't want them coming around all the time.
I see. Very interesting.
Well,
yeah,
you said.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask. You said more modern. Do you mean like within the past 200 or 300 years, or like what if we go back into the early Middle Ages? Do the sources still say that, or do they focus on something else?
The sources still say that, and by modern I mean we're talking like 1200s, 1300s, that time period. Right. Most of the original folklore on the elves was that when they showed up in our realms, in our lands, it was because they were basically looking for a booty call. And they found that to be incredibly fun. So after a while, if you didn't want their attention, you didn't say, elf. You would just be like, oh, I was visited last year by a fairy. And it's mistakenly been that over time, people were like, oh, they're the same thing. And it's like, no, if you look at the lore, like Draco commented, Robert Kirk, the Scottish minister, did extensive work that showed that fairies and elves were entirely different beings.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So even in folklore, they were never really connected. They were separate entities altogether. At one point go ahead.
I was going to say that's kind of the unexpert opinion I got when I would periodically read some of the folklore over the years since TE and also IV has been around. Now, I'm not an expert in it like you are, but I would read some of the stuff. And yeah, I mean, the only culture that seems to really equate them is the modern internet culture.
And that.
Oh, that's a whole different topic, and I imagine that Dakyndre has a lot to say about that.
Absolutely. In my research for this video, that is something that you've seen pop up I want to say within the last 10, maybe 15 years. When I started studying in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s, it was very much understood that elves and fairies and all of these things were different species. Over time, what seems to have happened in the neo-pagan community is you have novice witches teaching novice witches on Facebook groups and this and that. And what's happened is people are like, well, the seven-pointed star, commonly what we wear, is known in neo-pagan circles as the fairy star / elven star. It's kind of been used by both species in a sense, but what's happened is people have said, oh, it's an elven fairy star, they're the same thing. And no one's corrected it. And so you now have an entire generations of people who are like, on the idea that these are similar when they are not.
It's almost like I'll give the one Babylon 5 quote for this broadcast. It's like Ambassador Kosh saying, the avalanche has already started. It's too late for the public to vote.
Yeah, you just can't. Yeah, you can't unring a bell, right?
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, a difference that was also not in Tolkien's work, but was in here, was the Catholic Church at one time referred to elves interchangeably with the term demon. Like during interrogations in like medieval times, they would ask someone they're interrogating, they would be like, oh, you have a demon lover. And the person's answer oftentimes was, no, I have a fairy lover. And they meant elf, but they didn't want to attract attention again. So they just, it was this whole complex thing. But the church actually referred to elves as demons.
Well, the church referred to everything as demons, honestly.
And this is true. It's just,
I mean, they were able to wipe out the gods and all of those types of things, but they did not really drive out the fairy faith.
Right.
That has stayed inside of the culture. And if you go to places like Ireland, and by the way, I dropped a couple of links, one of which was some fairy lore that is in the Celtic area of sacredtext.com. You'll see a lot of works there, and many of those will discuss the dangers of, like, not only elves but fairies too. It is not like the perceived like let's go play with the fairies, how fun. It was like they're dangerous, you stay away from them. And
actually, interestingly enough, in it kind of ties in with Tolkien's thing. In Morgan Daimler's book, Fairycraft, she has an excerpt that says, in pagan times, fairies were seen as beings of the same nature as the gods, but on a lower level, existing somewhere between gods and humans. So, whereas humans and elves existed on the same, and even in folklore, the elves are still similar enough to humans that offspring is produced, that sexual relations are compatible. In the fairy lore, they're seen as nature gods, or almost like on the same par as divine beings, just slightly lower. So they are very, very different from elves, even in folklore.
Yeah. I wanted to mention, Draco had said from the earlier parts when we were talking about the modern internet era, he says the quote otherkin unquote community often equates the two, meaning the two terms, fairies and elves, meaning that as if they are the same thing.
Absolutely.
And the thing is that also he says in Germanic cultures, disease was often said to have been caused by quote elf shot, meaning
correct
the poison that the elves would put on their arrows.
Right.
So it's kind
crops
of like
dying,
that.
Same thing.
And Pink Pearl Fairy has just arrived in the room. Mina Belrose, how are you doing? Welcome.
Like you said, the elf shot, that was also thought to be what caused cattle sickness and crops dying. So attracting at times the attention of the elves was not something you wanted to do. And in some of the stories in Scotland, calling an elven lover could get you killed. Like there were examples where some of the old stories.
It's like, I guess to the church that would be like, converting, like demonology and everything.
I meant killed by the person you called. Like the person showed up and was like, I'm not in the mood to be here.
There is that too. She says in the Loch Nunga, which is an old English text, there is a charm against elf shot. So
there's a song. My wife was in the SCA for a long time, and there's this group. I don't remember the name of it. I'd have to look it up and see the lyric. But the title of the song is actually called the Elf Night, and the lyrics deal with. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. That
yes, it's an old
again,
Scottish
do we
tale. The Elf Night, in which a daughter, basically a princess, calls this elf from the elven realm, and he is committed to his other realm. He's there. He shows up, and his intention was, look, I have a family. I have no idea. I have no intention of being here. And because you have annoyed me, I have already killed like 7 other princesses that have been arrogant enough to summon me, and you're about to meet the exact same fate they did. And the only reason that she didn't meet the fate of dying was she knew a song or something that allowed her to like put him to sleep.
Yeah.
And she was able to escape. But otherwise, if she hadn't done that, he was flat intent on killing her for having dared to summon him.
Right. Wow.
So, yeah, in most folklore, elves were not something you typically wanted to see.
Oh, no kidding. I was just thinking about how the modern era also, and Dakyndre, we were actually discussing this the other day, and Dave, we've talked about it in the past. And it's not just the otherkin community. There is just a large community of people who they default to sources of their knowledge about fairies and elves, etc., and magic to modern works of fiction.
Yes, that is common in a lot of the neo-pagan groups I'm on, where like the author Jim Butcher, who does the Dresden Files, fantastic book series, entirely fictional. His information about the summer courts and the winter courts and all of that is completely inaccurate. But he's written 17 books, which they're great books, but I will see people reference all the time. Well, Jim Butcher's material talks about, the Seelie and the Unseelie courts, and I'm like, yeah, and it's entirely fictional.
And it's not right.
But they're holding it as accurate material instead of studying folklore.
I would say that might be the number one pet peeve of Morgan Daimler at this time too. Is
Morgan Daimler,
modern stories as source for their, it's what, and it's not like to discourage people from reading modern stories. They're fun, but it's not the same as saying, oh, well, it's based in fairy folklore, so therefore it's right. And it's
and as you brought up, Morgan Daimler,
actually Draco said it the best. He said there is a difference between actual lore and fiction. Absolutely.
Right. And as you put, Morgan Daimler, that is one of her pet peeves in she was talking about very recently, where someone came into a group she's on in Facebook and asked and it was a folklore group of all things, asked a question. They got 29 answers to their question. 18 of them were fictional book series.
Oh my gosh.
18 out of 29.
18? Oh my goodness.
Were fictional things. They were quoting like the Mary Gentry series. They used Dresden Files. They used fictional sources as their source of information, and that was in a fairy folklorist group.
Yeah. Wow. Well, the thing is that we might be accused of doing the same thing using Tolkien's material for our path. I mean, because a lot of people think that this is fiction. And Dave, I wanted you to address that because I think that Tolkien is not.
Well, it's an erroneous assumption. You can tell by the quality of the writing. There's also
the timing of it was like around the turn of the century. Like people don't realize that.
Yeah, he was born in 1892, so when he was growing up was the Victorian era, and if he would have directly incorporated the elements of his overculture, we would have a Victorian fairy type of thing, like those girls who supposedly took the photograph of the fairies. He would have riffed on that, sort of thing.
I've watched that movie before too.
Oh, that is a good movie. Yeah, I've seen it too.
It's really well done, actually. And right now I can't remember the name of it, but it's really
beyond that, you can't exactly. I'm a mathematician, so I'm really into logic. The problem is that modern people often misapply logic and try to prove things that are really outside the bounds of mathematics, which logic is a branch of. So you can't exactly prove that Tolkien's works contain deeper meanings, but you can certainly feel it if you are open to that mode of perception at all. And most of the things that I talk about and deal with are different cognitive perceptual modes, because I'm also a shaman. But that's there's been a whole loss of in modern culture. There's been a whole loss of abilities, I would say, and people get programmed, I suppose, when they're little kids, that this thing is true and this thing is false and this is fiction and this is factual information, but the sets are not that clearly defined. They tend to interpenetrate and blend into each other in different aspects. So
I would even go, oh, sorry.
Go on.
Go ahead.
I would go so far into that what you were saying is not even so much as kids, where we're seeing this, and really scarily in the last probably 20 years. And I think we're going to be doing a lesson on it later, like a later lesson is on the topic of discernment. And society as a whole has lost its ability to discern fact from fiction, and like to a really scary degree, where if you watch interviews from, like, I'll use Game of Thrones, I always use as an example, the actress Lena Headey, who played Cersei Lannister, played a perfect villain. I mean, she's that in that series, the HBO series, you love to hate that character because she's so vile. In real life, she's an amazing sweetheart, but she has had people come up to her in the like grocery store in LA, and they'll walk up to her and tell her that she is a horrible, vile, disgusting person, and they hope she gets hit by a bus on the way home. And it's literally they cannot differentiate that she plays a character, not that she is a character. For some weird reason, we've seen a societal warping of the ability to discern what is real and what isn't.
I would agree with that. And Pink Pearl Fairy came on and she said, it is a fairy tale, a true story about the Cottingley fairies. I couldn't remember the name, but so she has the movie and she loves it. Yeah. So I also wanted to Christy also, she says that she is a medievalist. So I believe that is her education, that she is going to school for. Christy, if we could drop in the comments like what your major is and like where, because I know you're not in school now, right? I think that you graduated, but that'd be great to know. But as a medievalist, she says, quote, it kills me when people use current fiction as resources or justifications for anything. It just kills me. Yeah. and I kind of quoted that. Like I understand that. So Draco Lomelindo says also there are role-playing manuals that expand on Tolkien's work for RPG games, but it is not necessarily consistent with Tolkien's writings. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen some of those.
Dungeons and Dragons was actually created to be like the way that they did it. They wanted it to actually tap into real magic. Like they were using Tolkien's the fantasy world part, but then they wanted to blend real magic with it and then make a game out of it. And So again, it was this bending,
Now,
what's fiction, what's real, what's,
the term that I use, and I didn't invent it, I encountered it somewhere before TE was formed, and that is mytho-historical. And that's how I view the whole Legendarium. And that may seem strange to other. It's sort of the blending between historical information and mythology. And the reason I call it that is because there are certain parts of Tolkien's Legendarium that match up with past events in primary world history. And you won't find exact matches because, to break into mathematics here, it's a mapping between two sets, but it's not bijective. That is, the elements are not mapped one to one between the sets, so you can tell, well, this corresponds to that, and this came from here. You can't do that. It's what's called surjective, in which more than one point from one set may be mapped onto the other, and in some cases, no points are mapped. So that's where ordinary people who aren't mathematicians are used to bijective set mappings, one-to-one relationships, but that's not how it works with the Legendarium. And I've tried to get that across to people over the years, and they don't get it. And I'm like, well, I did my best,
Right. So now so now the thing is that, like, we understand the difference between mytho-history, like when we're reading Tolkien versus other stories, because I will tell you that as much as I love other stories, there's a very different thing going into Tolkien. It's very different. But what would we tell somebody who doesn't understand the difference between that? What would we say to somebody who thinks, oh, well, I feel that way reading Harry Potter or Star Wars or, other kinds of and beautifully told stories? They definitely tie into, like the human, I guess, condition. They tie in with those places. But what do we tell them, like, with the blend of, like, what is folklore, what is just fiction? Like, what do we tell them? Like, how can we show them that,
well, one thing you have to have
different?
You have to have proper discernment, like you spoke of. For example, you take another popular author who's quite popular now, Stephen King, and take the Dark Tower series, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, it has a lot of mythological stuff in it, but it's mostly spinning out there in its own set. There are very few mappings between factual here and Stephen King's story there, although he tries to make them, but the link kind of falls apart. Now, maybe for some people it doesn't. Like I said, everyone's discernment is different, but for me, there's a different quality to Tolkien's writings. There are a number of authors that also wrote things that didn't have anything to do with mythology, and in that time period that Tolkien was alive and was young. I call it the Shamanic Impulse. There's a wonderful naturalistic book called The Friendly Stars by Martha Evans Martin, who speaks of the stars as your friends and that they have personalities. If you read it and then read some of Tolkien's writings, you'll see the affinity there.
I would agree with that. But you know what else to me seems really, I don't know, the word that I'm looking for is Tolkien's process. In other words, the origin of how he even began this stuff. Okay, he was writing material when he was a child. He was, his entire process was totally different than somebody saying, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to make a story, I'm going to make a world, with Tolkien, you could tell that it was a more organic thing that he discovered with his abilities. You can tell. And also with the timing of some of the writings versus, then when they were published, like, because, he did everything kind of in reverse, like he was writing things as a kid. And then most of his stuff got published after he died.
I would also, if I could add too, that a lot of times of how do you determine that something is a bit more accurate, I would go with as also saying that you have to look at the author themselves. Like Jim Butcher, if you talk to him, he'll be like, yeah, I set the Dresden Files in Chicago, but it was, and he has a whole narrative of how he created it. And it basically is, yeah, this is a work of fiction. Tolkien oftentimes, and Dave will know what I'm talking about too, Tolkien, when in like his Lord of the Rings stuff, when he's talking about the descriptions of like clothing the hobbits are wearing, he'll be like, they have brown pants and green shirts. And someone in one of his letters asked him, well, why don't you describe what they looked like? And his response was pretty much along the lines of, well, that wasn't how it was shown to me. Like,
exactly.
So he'll tell you, he'll be like, I didn't see, I just saw brown pants and green shirt. I can't tell you that they look like, Gucci pants with a Calvin Klein shirt. No, he's just like, they're brown and green, but yet other areas he will go into like absolutely stunning detail about something. And he's like, well, that's how it was shown to me. So he's kind of telling you that
exactly.
I didn't create this. This kind of popped into my head on its own. There's a different flair when an author says
it
that.
was definitely from an outer source all the time. Every time you ask Tolkien something, and Draco says Tolkien felt as if he was rediscovering the stories. They unfolded before him. And there are
rather
several
than creating
passages in all of the things of like, I'll go find out, or rather than
he literally says that, yeah. Well, that's not what happened.
Part.
What
like,
really happened was when he'd start to write something, and he would,
yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I was just going to I was going to follow up with what Luminido said. Yeah, that's not what happened. What really happened was sort of course correction happens repeatedly. He writes about it numerous times in all the information that we have that's been published on the Legendarium, and probably much more in private conversations that were not recorded. So.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, but and that's what I mean by his process was different. In other words, he was receiving it from the ancient sources directly because of his ability, his shamanic ability, and then also because of his amazing linguistic ability. He was probably one of the only shamanic types that could actually really get that world at a subtle level because of his ability. So I think that he was the reason that the muses chose Tolkien. That Flat Pillow says, this is one of my favorite channels. And I wanted to tell you guys that Christy did write back in the chat and said that she has finished her Master's of Arts in English from Texas Women's University, and her thesis is about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
Oh,
she's
interesting.
taking a break from her PhD in rhetoric, also in medieval literature. So just thought I'd tell you.
I just posted two things in the private chat because we non-runners of the channel can't post it in the regular comments. But what they are, this is JRR Tolkien's Gnosis for our day. It describes in more detail than I can, in an overview sort of manner, what Tolkien was actually doing from a Gnostic perspective, and it's from gnosis.org. And the first link is a PDF, which my friend Luthien did a transcript, and the second one is an actual MP3 audio, where you can listen to it.
Also, Draco made a really great comment in the thing that says the story started with language. In fiction, language is largely an afterthought, and that is very accurate. Tolkien had entire languages that were existing before he ever wrote the books. And usually most authors will do that. If they have a language, they're like, oh, it came along as I wrote the book or after, But no, a lot of his stuff was written before he had even started the books. So he didn't have an idea of, I'm going to make Lord of the Rings. No.
Exactly. That's what I mean by the process. It was organic. It came to him. And Pink Pearl Fairy says, yes, he was having memories and visitations from a being or beings who helped him remember the past. I've always felt that he was somehow in touch with real histories of real beings. Me too.
And
Me
so
too.
that's the difference between the fiction and the mytho-historian sort of thing, is when you look at the author, they will like if you look at Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling will be like, oh, I created this and I created that.
I created this. I created that.
This.
Even the Inklings, when the Chronicles of Narnia were being written at the same time period, he was making that up. He literally said he made it up. Now, he did use a lot of symbolism, I noticed, from
right,
but even astrology, which I think is funny because he likes
but
to
that
be
was intentional.
so Christian. But Aslan, the lion, Leo, the sun, and then the ice queen, Aquarius, like the air sign and the cold wind and the cold time of year. I'm like, really, you guys? Just to me, it's just funny.
Well, he was
like Leo the lion.
C.S. Lewis
it's just so funny.
C.S. Lewis was fascinated by Charles Williams at the time, who was also one of the Inklings for a while, and he probably got a lot of that because Charles Williams was heavily into the occult, so so he would know all that stuff.
Shares, interestingly, C.S. Lewis also wrote it as an allegory, which Tolkien was not too big on. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Tolkien was actually pretty literal with what he was doing. It's like, and I mean, it's like, really? How could you be literal? But, he was definitely, I really think that his entire process is what makes him very different. Even from a muggle onlooker that like maybe doesn't have any spiritual sense whatsoever, how could Tolkien be like in the lore material versus like fiction? Like how could we and I just think his entire process is different. And the other thing is that there's so much that I believe that it is in agreement with the old lore also. And I think that Dakyndre, would you say that Morgan might agree with that also?
I believe she absolutely would. And like I said, even
and I know
the fact
she's not an expert in the Legendarium the way that Dave is, but I think that if she were to read some of the stuff that is the same things that we've been reading, I think she would like immediately think of like resonances between, the material that she's familiar with. And
and even the stuff I've read, it ties in amazingly well. Like I said today, the fairy folklore very clearly differentiates that elves and fairies, even in folklore, are entirely different beings. You can have fairy animals, for example, like kelpies. In the Scottish thing, you can have banshees, which are fairy beings. No one would call a banshee an elf. It was very clear that a banshee was not an elf.
No, not an elf at all.
And you never really heard, you had fairy horses, you had fairy, animals. There was very clear distinction, whereas there were no elven animals. Like they may have had horses,
right?
But it wasn't. You never heard it referred to as, "Oh, this is an elven horse." No, this is just a horse that an elf happens to be using. Whereas fairies, it was like, "Oh crap, that's a fairy horse." So there was as much of a distinction in that as there was in Tolkien's work. So a lot of it syncs up to information. And then there's always other things too with Tolkien where information he couldn't have possibly known at that time.
Agreed. And Dave, I'm pretty sure that you have figured out some of that stuff with the
the whole existence of Doggerland is part of
Doggerland. That's what I was gonna say.
That's the
yes.
That's the continental shelf, way off the coast of what's now Europe. During the last glacial maximum, when most of the water, a lot of more water than there is now, was locked up in the polar ice caps, and so the sea levels were much lower, and the land, you could walk from Europe to England without any problem. You wouldn't even get your feet wet unless you crossed a river. But and that's just the way it was, and it extended out not quite 100 miles, but in some cases pretty close to it, off the coast of present-day Europe, which is now decreasing because of sea level rise. It's going the opposite direction because of climate change, but nevertheless, that's the way things used to be. And he actually wrote about that. Part of the maps actually follow the contours, but he couldn't have known that, because the first time that he died in 1973, the first time that they got, I mean, they had an inkling that things were there because fishermen would drag up like stuff that was obviously from land in deep water on their fishing nets. That happened when he was still alive, but after it wasn't until the late 70s that they started getting satellite radar mapping, and really high resolution not until the mid to late 80s. So he couldn't have known that. Having died in 1973.
And then they really started like dredging it and doing archaeological stuff in the 2000s, and really finding just crazy stuff like, oh wow, the world is older than we thought it was. Before we get too far, I wanted to read some comments. Nimue via Draco says Tolkien tapped on a layer of existence that hadn't been conveyed before. I would definitely agree with that. That's awesome.
Right.
Christy says the Green Knight, identified as a fairy by the author, rode a green horse, and everyone in the court just looked at this completely green guy and horse and goes, yep, that's a fairy.
Yeah. I remember reading that. Yes.
Draco says Doggerland maps look a lot like the maps of the Third Age. They certainly do, don't they?
Well, and like I said, two things that Tolkien most likely wouldn't have known. I'm actually myself working on a book, living out here in Hawaii. I'm looking at comparing local myths and legends that are literally like passed down word of mouth from family to family, some recorded here and there, but the similarities of things that Tolkien wrote about, for example, like the island of Aman, the Undying Lands to the west, some of the correlations between specifically the big island that I'm on and Tolkien's writings are absolutely like stunning. Like he talks about like
wonderful.
Well, for example, like Valinor, he talks about was removed from the world.
Yeah.
And there it was lush, it was tropical, but it was removed from the world of men. When you go on to the west side of this island, if you leave the boat harbor, it drops like 2,000. It drops like 2,000 feet. It literally, like local legend says that at one point it was extremely tropical, and that the gods like ripped it away from the land of men.
Interesting.
Like it just drops off. And you're like, you go outside the harbor and suddenly you're in like 1,500 foot deep water. There is no continental decline. It's just gone. And yet the local legends tell that it was lush, tropical, and then removed.
Wow. Very
so Tolkien would have, being that at that time something like that wasn't written down, the fact that he's talking about Valinor having been ripped away from Aman, from the land of men, is like stunning, because it's like, wait a minute here.
Wow.
Yeah, the phrase is they were removed from the world into the realm of hidden things.
Yes. Well, and I mean, even we could like take the Legends of Mu, which is Lemuria, and Lemuria is gone now, but there's still resonance. there's Atlantis, all of these things. And some of these stories even kind of cross over with the Legendarium with, the lands of Numenor being like kind of resonating, also called Atalante, which I think is very interesting, being Atlantis sinking. Like there's resonance, like even on the timelines, that there's a lot of really interesting, correlations. And again, like really tapping in on that mytho-historical thing that you talked about, Dave.
Yeah, and I'm not a linguist by any means. I'm kind of the opposite. I'm a visual thinker, but
Yeah.
it could be. I don't know this for a fact, but oftentimes with other root words, the root words would actually appear before the stories would appear. So it could be that the Atal, the downfallen root word actually appeared before the Numenor story arose. Although I don't know that for sure, not being a linguist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think Atalante and Atlantis, I mean,
Right.
there's similarity even just in the words. And yes, it's not true that, but the story of the island sinking, and then the way that the timelines are with Atlantis sinking, like some of the other things that we are aware of. And Atlantis, boy, we could go off on a whole different tangent there, because I've been watching a kid on, he's a kid to me, because, like he would probably be my son's age, but there's a guy on YouTube called Bright Insight, and he talks about possibly that there is a discovery of Atlantis, and that they found it in Western Africa, and it's been pushed up by the shelf into a country that unfortunately is very dangerous to be there and unearth and all of the stuff. So we've got to wait in order to do the archaeology that's necessary to like figure out if this is the thing. But he has amazing videos on that. You guys should go check it out. And he correlates it with what, the Greek history says, and like everything. It's incredible. It's very amazing.
Yeah, I saw a documentary on that. It was fascinating.
Yeah, it's like Bright Insight. Boy, that guy has it. Like, he is very cool. Just thought I would oh, go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask if before the stream ends, if you could post the two links that I posted, JRR Tolkien's Gnosis for Our Day, the PDF and the audio file, which are
okay.
In the
I already did it in the live chat, but what I will do is I will add it in the comments.
Okay.
And or I will put it in the description of the video.
All right.
But right now it's in the live chat, and I'll make sure that I do it afterward.
That's that for me and my friend Lucian anyway. That's a very powerful basically discussion, because it was sort of the one that got us both turning this way to create a spirituality from Tolkien's stories.
Yeah, now, Dr. Stephen Heller he's something.
Yeah,
he is something. But yes, I will definitely share those links down below. Now, we've already talked about Tolkien and the Legendarium, and the evidence in the Legendarium about fairies and elves literally having a totally different definition. We've talked about elves and men being able to, mate and make offspring, and half elven and all of these types of things.
Right.
Dakyndre, I wanted to talk to you about your recent class with Morgan about, I know, oddly, elven sexuality, and how did any of the material that she talked about, does it resonate with this Tolkien part with the half elven and some of that type of thing? I wanted to have it in this video.
Not ironically enough, no.
Interesting.
And here's why. I asked this question because in most of the folklore that you encounter, elves and even fairies, but elves specifically, were and are superior. They view themselves as vastly superior to the humans they encounter. both in skill, grace, intelligence, magical ability. They don't see themselves as anything in common with humans. Now, that being said, I asked Morgan, well, then why is there the stories of having elven offspring? And you talk about, oh, this elf came together, mated with a human, and produced a baby. If they are so superior, why would they want to inject human DNA into their genetics? Two things that came back. One was research from myself. Some of it could have been just pure survival. But also a lot of it turns to be from the Catholic Church. Like there are stories in the Scottish thing where there's one in particular where a human was taken to the Fey realm or to the Elven realm and turned into an elf, like magically or somehow they were transmuted from being human to an elf as a favor to that person. So what you had happen was if that person had Christian tendencies, then you suddenly saw this thing where some of the elves became concerned with the concept of going to heaven. You also saw it with like while most like fairy lovers, elven lovers were kind of one night stands, like I said, booty calls, sometimes genuine relationships did occur. And so what was happening was, let's say the female, she goes to the priest and says, hey, I have a elven lover. When I die and I have a human soul, when I die and I go to heaven, will they join me? There was some of the Catholic priests were like, no, they're not human. They're evil. You're screwed. Others were a little bit more open-minded. And the idea became, well, if you could have an offspring, if you could inject human DNA into their bloodline, you could retroactively redeem the entire bloodline and they would get to go to heaven.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's where you saw the
how like monetarily
well or just exactly it was this concept that
let's perpetuate
kudo points
religion like through offspring. And I mean, I think churches do that anyway, but wow,
kudo points of I just saved 50,000 years worth of souls for the heaven side. Cha-ching, look at my brownie points. Right. So it was the whole in most folklore, the concept was just a very it was a very Catholic Church driven thing that they had babies. It wasn't common.
It's strange because it's almost the exact opposite of Tolkien's explanation of the half-elven. The humans were ennobled by the elven blood, and
exactly.
but they got the chance to choose. The half-elven got the chance to choose which race they would belong to.
Yeah, like they got a chance to choose whether they would be human or elven, like by choice, like voluntary choice.
Yeah, whereas in the folklore,
and what a
the
hard
elves
choice.
had no interest. I mean,
honestly.
Yeah. The elves had a thing, like I said, where they could turn a human into an elf and in essence activate DNA, raise them to something far superior. And so you almost had nostalgia that brought them back to have a kid. But most of the time, the idea that there were half elves was simply because a human woman was like, look, if we have a child, I can save your entire family line. And when we go to heaven, we can be together. It was very much a product of the Christian Church versus the Elven's desire.
Well, the comments are running in, so I'm gonna interject just to read some of them. Okay.
Sorry. It's just...
No, it's okay. So Draco says changeling myths. Okay, so yes, meaning, and if anybody doesn't know what that really means, it has to do with human babies being stolen by fairy and then swapped out with one of their fairy babies. And so, the human baby would be like, in their realm, and then the fairy baby in this realm, and obviously
which tied into
okay.
but that tied into the same concept of around the time as the Christian church was, I have a human baby that I've adopted, so now I have a soul or something. It was this weird correlation.
So again, interesting. Draco also says fairies were more tricksters than elves, not evil, except in the Christian interpretation. Okay.
Exactly.
Christy says, fairy lovers, Sir Lonval, you have the fairy lover, and her one condition is that Lonval cannot mention her ever, because no, you don't mention the fairy lover, like Fight Club. It's kind of like don't talk about it, right? And again, what they are not called, right? Like we saw that in the Lost Tales. Vera says what? So I'm not sure like what she's saying what to. So I'm reading your comment. Pink Pearl Fairy says, I have always felt that I have had Fae / Elven in my bloodline. Does anyone else feel this way, or do you think that it isn't actually able to happen? Okay.
Ironically, if I could answer, sorry.
Go ahead.
To interject on Pink Pearl Fairies. If you go into, I have his book here. I was talking about it earlier. Let me find, there it is. Just a second. In book Elves, Rights, and Trolls by
Keldon Gunderson. Yes.
Gunderson.
That's right.
Ironically enough, in most of the Swedish families, or Scandinavian, so Sweden, Norway, Denmark, if you trace your family heritage back far enough, in most of the Scandinavian cultures, you will almost always find an elven being in their family genealogies. And so you'll see like great grandmother back in like 1602 mated or married this guy, and the region he's from is where elves are known to be in those countries. And so you can absolutely have elven genetic bloodlines. We're also going to make a video later on covering both Lawrence Gardner's Realm of the Ring Lords and Nicholas de Vere's the Dragon Bloodline or Dragon Legacy. And both of those lend to the idea as well that to this day there are absolutely elven bloodlines in existence.
And by the way, Ian, on the note of the Scandinavian lines being elven, he mentions Alfheim, which totally makes sense.
Exactly, absolutely.
I want to give sense.
So Vera was saying, I was saying what to the idea that if an elf had a human baby, it would save their entire line. Oh, very interesting. Oh, meaning because the church said, oh, you're all going to heaven now.
Yeah, you could retroactively save
people. And Gardner are not historical or accurate, though. That's what he said. And I'm going to let you comment on that, Dakyndre, because you have read all three.
Go ahead, Dave.
Before he does so, I'd like to follow up with a Legendarium answer to the last question.
Oh, okay. I apologize.
And that is that it's possible. It's more possible with an elf human hybrid. Basically, that happened quite often not often, but it happened with some frequency in the Legendarium. Although there is something called the line of Luthien, where Luthien's mother Melian was not she was not human and she was not elven either. She was a Maiar.
She was
Uh,
Maiar. That's
a,
right.
a lesser god, basically, and but that she took physical form. She took biological form because she loved an elf man, Eluthingal, and Luthen was born out of that union, and so the the descendants from that point down had what they call the line of Luthien, or a threefold race of humans, of elves, and of the Mire of the Blessed Realm. So that that is possible. It's just rather that was the only case with an actual incarnate Maya that that I can think of right now. Is I don't know of any other. So.
Okay, before I go further, Draco says they rely, meaning Devere and Gardner, rely on erroneous assumptions and false etymologies. Though the connection between the Scythian and Elven is something that is true, but the way that it is presented is extremely misleading. That's what he says.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, like I said, we'll end up doing a whole separate video on this because it can be very misleading and there are things to it, but a lot of it, like I said, we'll go into it much deeper. It's complicated.
Yeah,
but they do go into the topics.
Question: should we do that Devere Gardner video for the public, or should we do it only for our patrons?
I think we should do it for the public because it's so out there. I mean,
okay.
I encountered it when we were starting TE.
Yes, I remember.
And it was like, well, you're not telling the right thing. Nicholas Devere says that you gotta, I don't know, swallow some nickels and shit some bullets or something. I mean,
well, I think that there's a lot of things. So I know that Tracy Twyman was working with him, and I really admired her and her work. But I also felt that, some of the things about Nicholas Devere himself was a little.
Like I said, a lot.
He might have been a little bit mental, a little. Oh, and Ian says, Draco says, yes, I have researched that topic extensively for many years since 2005. He advocated the consumption of virgin menstrual blood.
Yeah. He was, like I said, it goes back to my comment on discernment. You have to read with any author most times and figure out what parts are accurate versus what parts are him being a mental nut job, because some of his stuff, in Devere especially, he can absolutely be a nut bag, but his stuff is a lot better. And then I've also so like I said, we'll do a whole video where we go into this.
Yeah, and actually, because of Draco's deep studies on that, Draco, if you are interested in being in the video like how we are, we would love it if you would join us for that video. We would really like it. And
Absolutely.
If you are nervous about being seen, you can just do what Dave does and just block your camera.
Okay? Yeah, I basically just signed in with Facebook, so it's my Facebook avatar. That's how I do it.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, we can handle the we can handle the camera part. We would like it if you would hop on, but you can also do it in the live chat. And he said, I would love to be in the video. Excellent. So we'll try to make sure that you can, we're going to get our schedules together so that all four of us can be on this video. Okay. So, right now, as I recall, Dakyndre, wasn't it Sunday, Monday, Tuesday that were days that were like pretty good for you most of the time? So
yeah, those are those are my guaranteed days off.
Guaranteed days off. So Draco, if you can look in your calendar and see like roughly on a Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, like if you have days that you could do that, like if you can just kind of tentatively say, okay, we're going to do this video, and then we'll try to narrow down a time for all of that, and I'll get with you guys, and maybe we'll do this set up by email, Facebook Messenger, not sure yet, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah,
we'll figure it out. So okay, did we cover all the topics that we were going to cover tonight, other than like the trail of thread of like, the cosmology with Atlantis and Atalante? Like, that is a different topic. We touched on the Dragon Legacy and the Lawrence Gardner Realm of the Ring Lords work. That's going to be a different video, and hopefully Draco will be on that one. And by the way, he says Mondays and Tuesdays are good for him. So, okay, we'll screen out Sunday. So Monday or Tuesday. I think it's probably going to be on a Monday, just like because of even my own schedule. So be looking for like probably a Monday, and it'll probably be like mid-afternoon, okay, something like that, because we got to make sure that Dave is available. We got to make sure Dakyndre is available, and we're all in different time zones. And so we covered. It'll probably be like kind of like the early afternoon to mid-afternoon. Just saying, okay, for your time zone. And let's see, is there anything else? So we talked about, okay, the difference with fairies and elves. We have some source material, and I'll make sure to put that in the descriptions after the video.
Now, Lisa,
yes.
Did you want to do this next Monday on the 17th, or did you want it later than that? The reason I'm asking,
I want it later because the 17th is our full moon ritual for our patrons only. So I would like to do it.
We might be doing one in IV2 either on the 17th or the 18th. Just
okay. Oh, brilliant. Okay. And if any of you guys are interested in either of these, okay, so for the TE ones, it's for the patrons only. You guys will be receiving an email from Patreon with that. If you are interested in the IV one that Dave and Luthien do, contact Dave and on Facebook, or you can go to westofwest.org and send a contact.
Well, the forum is there. There's the IV, the main IV forum. There's also a TE subsection where if you have any questions, whatever, you can discuss it there.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, the forum. Maybe I'll try to link the forum at the bottom of this video too, so that if people are interested in coming onto the forum.
Right.
Yeah.
And we covered the material that I had in terms of the folklore, which I did a very just sort of generic and skimming of it, because as I joked while prepping for this video, my pages that I wrote were about 2.5 pages, and I was jokingly going that I could go on for another million years.
I know,
the amount of folklore is like, when you get into elves and fairies and all of that, the amount of folklore that exists is staggering.
It's a lot. Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get ready to wrap up here. It's in Pacific time, we're at 5:37. And before we close down anything, does anybody else have any questions on what we have discussed on the topic that we are doing? And Christy says, oh man, a forum, I feel like it's 2003 again, and I'm living for it. Love me a good forum. Okay, you will like this, Christy. I'll make sure that you get the link. Okay, I will make sure you get the link. We have it now where you can log in with a Facebook login, so that you don't have to have an email account and the whole bit too. So,
and it works.
We've got that taken care of now, so that's really great. And then you don't have to deal with all of that. You can just log in with Facebook. Okay. I think that we are good on everything. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Vera. Thank you, Pink Pearl Fairy. Thank you, Draco and Nimue, for coming tonight. It's been excellent. And I do wish that more people were available tonight, but that's okay. Maybe they'll catch the archive of this. And if you guys are watching the replay on this, please put your questions in the comments. We want to answer the questions. We want this to be kind of an authoritative video for elves and fairies are different. They're different. They're not the same. And there is either mistakenly the same because of what Dakyndre talked about, like where it's kind of like you have to hide talking about something, so you use a code word for it, and then it gets mistaken like, oh, they're the same thing. No, they're not the same thing. So then there's also a miseducation, like, if, like in certain families, maybe. Now, I know, okay, I can just say this. This is like from my parents, like being like my mom being raised in rural Western Montana, right? And they would have like certain weeds around. Now, they didn't know the Latin names of the weeds. So they just, like the common names that were like known of those weeds, like back east, didn't exist sometimes in the rural areas of Western Montana. We didn't have the internet to, do research and all of that type of stuff. So they would just call like, random flowers like pinks or something like that. But then you learn in another area, if you call a flower, pinks, that it means something else. And so again, it's about a common language, and with plants, well, animals too, you would get the Latin name for it. I don't think that we have a Latin name equivalent for fairies and elves. Like, we just don't have that, right?
No, fairy,
so
even the word, well, even the word fairy in Morgan Daimler's video, fairy, as far as we can tell, doesn't have a Latin derivative as much. It possibly came out of the French language, somewhere in there. But even she's not where its origin was.
Okay. Interesting. And okay, Pink Pearl Fairy says, no, I will have to watch the replay to see what I missed, but I could listen to this for hours. I love this subject. Wow, wonderful.
And I would even, sorry.
Anonymous Faye says, same Pink Pearl. Okay, hi, Anonymous Faye. I don't think I saw you pop in. That's wonderful. I'm glad that you said hi. Christy says, yep, we have the same thing in Texas. The same plants have different names, even in different parts of Texas. Exactly.
And I would also say, like I said, you hit on the code word.
It makes bioregional herbalism a challenge when you don't know what plant you're talking about.
I would also say that some of the confusion, as silly as the analogy is when dealing with like a 4 or 5 year old who is calling everything a kitty.
Exactly.
Like, they can look at a dog and they'll be like, ooh, kitty. And it's like, no, dog.
Dog,
they'll look, everything is a dog or a cat. The early human societies were the same thing. They were looking at a troll and they're like, elf. They were looking at a fairy and they're like, elf.
Yeah.
It's like, no.
No. Well, and that
also
kind of gives me to an astrology analogy that I come up with sometimes, where it's like, when you get a tool and like you go, okay, when you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I can use this tool on this nail, everything looks like a nail. So even things that don't require a hammer, sometimes people want to use it, and that's what can happen with people like learning astrology and other things, that they use the same thing over and over. Like, they want to use it for everything. And it's like, there's no one size fits all tool here, you guys. I mean, astrology is good for some things, and then it's not good for other things. You know what I mean?
There also
if I comment on
ahead,
the
Dave.
replay in the name of Moonflower Fairy, that is me also. I have 2 user IDs. No problem. We do know that. No problem, Pink Pearl Fairy.
I was going to say that there also may have been in later centuries that, like the whole, like Dakyndre was talking about earlier, the whole prohibition against naming, naming the elf or naming the fairy sort of thing. And it reminds me, it may not be come out of the same source, but it reminds me, see, the generations in my family are much longer than they generally are. So my father, he's he's deceased now, but he was born in 1915. That's 1915, not 1950. And when he was a kid growing up in the mid-20s and so forth, his mother had Choctaw ancestry. But you couldn't say that because at that time, Native American ancestry was considered a stain upon the bloodline.
Yes,
you know,
very much so.
And it was almost like, you know, you knew it was there, but you couldn't name it. Now it's like a badge of honor or something. They've swung the other way, but you know.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Well, and I think that changed when, you know, like benefits were available for people that were like half Native American, you know, things like that. Like there was definitely some shifts in cultural view on that.
Right.
So Anonymous Face says, sorry, I'm new here. LOL. We are so happy that you are here because, again, we want people that are in the general, you know, elven and or fairy community to know that there is a difference between elves and fairies. And we talked about it in this video. So, you know, if you just popped in, we'd love if you watched the replay so that you could see. So what we did in this video was we contrasted the works of Tolkien, which are, you know, kind of our path specialty, if you will, because that's what we use as our texts for a lot of what we do as a belief system for traversing our lives. Okay, so it's more about, you know, a guide. It's not, you know, it doesn't tell you what to do, but it's about like knowing the cosmology. And then also Dakyndre is on, who has studied in esoteric texts as well as studied with fairy folklorist Morgan Daimler. And so we talk about some of those sources. Some of them are online for free, and we'll try to comment on some of the things down lower. So Pink Pearl Fairy, why are you sorry that you are here? I'm glad you're here, and know everyone is happy to have you. Absolutely. I hope that you get a lot of good information by rewatching this video, because we're trying to bring out authority in why elves and fairies are different. They are not the same. And we love educating the wider community, and we have source material that we have referenced in this particular film. We're going to have more source material that will link either in the comments or update in the description of the video. But we had to go on live tonight, you know, when we told everybody we'd go on live. So here we are. Vera says, I'm supposed to be 1/8 Choctaw, but it didn't show up in my DNA. I will tell you a possible reason for that. I know a genealogist who says that if your Native American blood comes from the female, in other words, a mother line, it will not show up in DNA tests. So you may still have the Choctaw, but if it's from your mom, it may not show up. The code is more
if they're testing for Y DNA,
guidelines than actual rules. Yes. Thank you.
Go with Pirates of the Caribbean. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's so cool. Awesome.
Exactly. Well said. Well said.
Well, I'm going to let you guys get going. It's 5:47 now in Pacific time. So we're going to sign off and let you guys have dinner and all of the things, or, you know, like East Coast, you know, hit the hay. And if anybody's coming in from great grandmother, okay, but is it from your mother's line or your dad's line? That's what I'm talking about, because it does not show up if it's from mom. Okay, so, well, and even the mother to your dad, like let's say that would happen, it might not show up that way too. So it's really hard to get those markers to show up. It has to be like the dad's dad or whatever. So hopefully they're going to improve on the technology. Okay. But he may not have been able to carry the marker, meaning from the tests that they have. Okay, currently.
It depends on whether
so it may have already been invisible, but maybe technology will get better and actually get deeper into the Native American DNA and be able to report like the mother and dad side.
Typically, if they're testing for allele on the Y chromosome, of course, women won't have it. If they're testing mitochondrial DNA, there may be. I haven't researched this, but there should be unique markers on the mitochondrial DNA that are passed through the female. So it's difficult to say, though. I haven't researched it.
And yeah, well, my genealogist friend is the one that actually told me about this. Yeah, and actually, Pink Furl Fairy says that she's supposed to be half Cherokee, and yet nothing showed up in her DNA, but she inherited it from her mother. So when the mother is the one with the line, it won't show up in the DNA, at least at this time. So maybe if we wait for the future tests, they may have better technology in order to measure on the mom side.
And so if I could address,
you guys know about that.
If I could address Anonymous Faye's comment real quick as well, just before we close. Anonymous Faye says, it's kind of funny. I identify more Elven than Fairy, but my username states otherwise. I didn't get into that. Actually, it's another misconception that Fae and Fairy are the same thing. People will be like, oh, they're of the Fae. The term Fae is a very broad term. It even in most of the folklore resources, Fae simply means a being or creature that's otherworldly or supernatural. So in that category, in terms of folklore, an elf would be a type of Fae, an otherworldly, in a sense, being. Now, it would differ from Tolkien's work in which they are part of the earth, but in folklore specifically, the term Fae could mean any creature, just like nowadays car could mean any one of companies that made it. So you would absolutely still be Elven and Fae in the terms of traditional folklore, because elf is a type of Fae.
Yeah, well, that might be where a lot of confusion can come in too.
Right. There'll be people misinterpret that as, well, Fae means fairy. No, Fae means literally anything that is an otherworldly or supernatural being.
Wow. Very interesting.
You could almost categorize a demon as a type of Fae. As bizarre as it is.
As bizarre as that is. I wouldn't put that in the Fae category, but yeah. Well, hey, I hope that everything is like, no, you didn't mess. You are more than welcome to hang out with us, and we're going to be having some more videos, on various subjects with the elves and elven bloodline and what that means. So I hope that you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And we'll see you next time that we're on live streaming. It'll put a notice in your inbox or on your phone, and then you'll be able to see our next live stream that we do and participate. We'd really like that. Thank you for stopping by tonight. So, okay, I guess that we're going to wrap this up. It's almost 6, California time. So we're going to wrap it up for everybody tonight. Draco, we're going to be in touch with you about probably not next Monday, because we're going to be doing the ritual for the moon, but probably the following Monday, which, by the way, let me peek in here and see if I have anything happening, because I believe that would be the 24th. Okay, so far, Mars is in Capricorn that day. So far, I'm not booked that day, so maybe we can do it for January 24th, but Dakyndre, would that be too early to do it, or could you gather the materials for the Realm of the Ring Lords and the Dragon Legacy at that point? And later, I just want to tell you, I have a PDF copy of the Dragon Legacy that could be for our patrons, or back end or something like that.
That gives me 2 weeks. That gives me time to brush up on the books. I have both of them, and they're actually sitting on my desk right next to me.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. Are you allowed to show us?
Sure. So Realm of the Ring Lords looks like this.
Like that. Yep, I have that one. It's packed away. Mine is packed in and not even in the same town as I'm in right now. So
I pulled them out because I reference them sometimes, especially since Realm of the Ringlords, he connects Tolkien's work and stuff like that. Again, the discernment part comes in. And then Dragon Legacy looks like this.
Okay.
And it's called The Secret History of an Ancient Bloodline.
Right.
Again,
Kleiman was also involved in that book.
I've owned both of these books, probably since 2000. These exact books are the ones I bought 20-something years ago.
Wow.
Interesting.
So,
I had my my Lawrence Gardner copy for about 15 years.
So I will brush up on it. That gives me about 2 weeks. We can do that. I can also touch basis with Draco if he would like, and we can discuss things and go over stuff. But absolutely, that's plenty of time.
Oh yeah, I think that you guys would be really a good, like contact to have. Hopefully you guys now, Dakyndre or Draco, either one of you guys, are either of you friends on Facebook, like where you can message each other?
I don't think we are, but I believe that we could find each other.
Help you guys get connected on Facebook. There's also the forum too.
Yeah, via email.
Draco says more. He would be more down with it with email, actually.
Okay.
So we'll do it via email. That'd be fine.
Yeah, we can touch base. Absolutely.
Cool. Excellent. Okay. Well, we're gonna wish a good night to all. Okay, and I'm gonna put Laita blessings.
Oh, and make sure to put the forum link in when you do the, finalize the video, whatever you call it.
I will put it in the description when it's all done, because that way people can go to the forum. Yeah, because it's wonderful. And I'll see if I can get it to Christy in messages too, like when I get it. Anonymous Faye says, question, do you have a Facebook group? So what I'm going to do, Anonymous Faye, is I am going to put our link tree, and everything that you want is there. Right. So our Facebook, our Instagram.
The only caveat I have to say is that Facebook is mainly for sort of meet and greet. Deeper discussion should be taken to the forum, because Facebook is just not designed for deep discussions. You can't find anything after it percolates down for a while.
Yeah.
If you do, it's kind of random.
I was thinking about adding the forum link to our link tree. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
In fact, Luthien asked me if you had.
I can totally do that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, but meanwhile, for here, we can have them at least start. They can start on Facebook, and there's still some people to know, on Facebook. But the deeper discussion, the stuff that is really meaty, happens in the forum, definitely. Okay, and she says, and Anonymous Face says, thank you so much, and then Christy says, please do, and Pink Pearl Fairy says, Namarie. So Namarie. Laita, blessings to all of you, and have a good evening, and we'll see you next week for the patrons for our full moon ritual for Isil Narvinye for Iole the Smith. Okay, have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.